What's up YouTube? So today I got a bit of a different video for you. This is some old footage I captured of me creating a goblin type character. And I didn't want it to go to waste. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up the time of the video. It took me about like 2 hours or so. But I know you guys don't have that type of time that you want to sit around listening to me talk. So instead I'm going to speed it up and kind of give you the broad strokes of what I'm doing during the video and kind of talk over it and give you a bit of a walkthrough that way, and hopefully it helps you create the similar type of character. So let's get started. So at first I'm going to start with a polyprimitive. Typically it's a cube, and then I like to divide it into 4 sections, usually horizontally and then vertically along the x-axis, kind of like what you see I'm doing here. And now I'm expanding out the front of the chest and then also giving the character a bit of a waist by using my space, create a edge loop, and then bringing that in with the scale tool. Or actually in this case I'm giving him a bit of a belly. Now what I'm going to do is continue making more edge loops in order to refine the shape. And I think what I'm about to do is even out the shoulders and actually give him a neck as well that I can attach a head to in the future. Obviously what you're looking at is very rough type of modeling, very low poly, very kind of geometric style. In the future, when you're done your geometric look, you apply smooth shading to give it a smoother look. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of cut there. Basically in that missed portion of time, what I ended up doing was selecting where the arms are and making sure the mirror symmetry function is enabled in Maya, and then extruding out so that I was creating basically like a tubular shape that created the arm. And then from there, I added more edge loops as a way of basically molding the arm into more of a organic shape from that geometric block style. So now you see that I have 2 arms made, and I'm checking how the smoothing feature looks just to see that it's coming along as I like. Usually I like to make sure I kind of toggle between smoothing and natural form to make sure it's not too bad. Yeah, here, and then I'm just doing some more refining of the shape. A lot of this video you're gonna find, and something you should probably know, that whenever I make models, it's not like I have a blueprint that I typically follow. Like, I might have some concept art I like to reference from, but a lot of the time I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, or just kind of problem solving along the way. So it's hard to kind of give you a step-by-step tutorial because honestly I'm just kind of figuring it out at the same time. But again, you see how I'm kind of molding the arm to make it more of a cylindrical shape, so that's not too square, doesn't have too many harsh edges. This is so that when you smooth it in the future, it looks a little more natural, not too awkward. Here I think I'm building out the arms, giving them some nice thick forearms, and then also giving some definition around the shoulder and the bicep. There you go, you see the smoothing feature. Sometimes when I work in smoothing, it's actually better. It's more helpful to see what the final product will look by enabling smooth preview and then adding edge loops that way. That way you can see the more natural curvature of any kind of body feature you might adding, like for example the chest that I'm building out here right now. Another good thing is also modeling, changing the position of the vertex as opposed to the entire edge. Usually that's helpful when you want to position a very specific point, and it's also super helpful to make sure you always have that symmetry feature on, especially when you're making characters. It just frankly cuts your time in half being able to do that. That way you're not like making one arm and making another, and then then they look the same, you know what I mean? It just saves time, just trust me on that one. There we go, so I'm making my goblin a little more buff, a little more ripped, with a bit of a beer belly apparently. I think I wanted this character to be a bit cuter at the time when I was building him. I wanted them to be a bit more, just kind of comical, not so cool and intense and protagonisty like you've seen in some of the other models, if that makes any sense. I'm going to continue molding out the arm now, and then return back to the square into the geometric form, and this is actually where I'm building out the hands. My hands aren't exactly the most detailed, but I like to do simple hands where it's almost kind of like a mitten type style. Here I bumped into some trouble selecting the faces of the hands, so I had to just make sure I was selecting the right thing. Usually wire preview helps a lot with that. But yeah, okay, there we go. So I got the mitten fingers going on right now. Now I'm going to make more edge loops right where I want the thumb to be. And I'm actually going to model the hand so it has more of that nice curvature you might see when your hand is in its resting position. In the future, what I might do is bring in the gaps between the fingers. So that it looks more realistic, but my kind of style that I've been doing recently, most of the characters have that mittens type hand. I think it's kind of cute, and frankly it saves me a lot of time in modeling and rigging. So it might be a lazy way, but I think when it comes to beginner stuff, you just want to kind of get a hold of how it's working and then move your way up from there. Edge loops again are really helping with making the fingers a lot more, or the thumbs in this case, a lot more realistic. And then I'm going to bring in the wrist so that it doesn't look too tubular going down from the bicep to the forearm to the wrist, because the wrist will jut out a tiny bit. You see, I spent a lot of time making sure that the upper body looked proportional and looked to how I wanted it to be, because I knew the character going in was actually going to be shirtless. So I wanted to make sure that it looked, basically got that feel of a little menacing, but also kind of cute at the same time. Like it kind of hit the spot between. Here's some more problem solving where I'm trying to figure out how to bring in the wrist a little bit so that it doesn't look too awkward. How going from wrist to forearm, and there you go. So there's a bit of a bulge right after the crook of your elbow to represent your forearm. So that's a bit of a quick tip when you're trying to build that out. And here I'm scaling it based on faces. There you see that I was just kind of quickly adjusting how the thumbs look. I didn't like the position. It felt unnatural. Your thumbs typically sit to the side of your hand, not as opposed to right below. Your joint is what moves it there. So in your natural resting place, your thumb is obviously to the side. So I wanted that to be a little more realistic. And again, I'm putting a lot of detail into the area that I know is going to get a lot of focus. The face, the upper body, the hands, the arms. Which is why I'm spending a lot of time here. And frankly, I'm doing a lot of problem solving on the fly as well. Just trying to make sure it's not exactly quite what I want. And sometimes, I'm sure like many of you, you get kind of frustrated when something doesn't look exactly to your liking. So you might spend a little extra time trying to clean it up a bit. Unfortunately, I messed up because I had turned off. See, this is a mistake I want you guys to try and avoid. Making sure that when you're working off a symmetrical object, you have symmetry on so that the opposite side is also being adjusted properly. Because now I kind of have to duplicate the work I had done on the left side. Now I have to duplicate it onto the right, which is kind of not necessarily a waste of time, but frankly, I didn't have to spend the time doing that if I had just turned on symmetry. So always just be careful of that. Sometimes you might want to turn off symmetry because your character obviously is asymmetrical. Or like, for example, Edward Elric, for example. Like he has got a human arm and then a mechanical arm on his right side. So that's a case where you don't need symmetry. But for the most part, you usually want to have symmetry, especially when you're making these base models. It helps a lot when it comes to saving on time. I frankly believe I could have saved maybe like 15-20 minutes fixing the other arm if I had just symmetry on. So yeah, that would have helped a lot. Okay, so now we're moving on to the legs, and I'm just going to extrude out a few faces from the bottom to create basically a basic leg shape, making sure I still have the smooth preview on to get that final look. I made sure to keep a few faces between the legs to kind of imply where the crotch would be. So that helps when you kind of rig your character and you make it walk later on in the future. It makes it a lot smoother. Just giving a quick check through of how the character's looking. Going back into the legs now I'm going to be adding the knees. You see, whenever I add more edge loops around basic shapes for body limbs, I like to add the edge loops around the joints. So the knees, the ankles, the wrists, the elbow, the shoulders. I like to use that as a starting point before adding more detail. Because you need to know that when you rig your character, they bend at those edge loops. And so it's nice to have a few extra, like it's good to bevel at those areas or add a few extra edge loops so that the deformation of that area is more natural and you don't get some weird intersecting polys or anything like that. That usually helps a lot. Again, just tweaking up more of the body. It's that perfectionism coming back, trying to make sure it's exactly how I want. And I extruded from the bottom now because I knew I wanted to extrude out from the front in order to make the legs, as you can see here. I made some nice little kind of toes poking out, nothing too crazy, similar to how we have a mitten limbs in a similar fashion. And yeah, and hopefully that kind of fits with the style I've created. That might not fit with what you guys are trying to do. Again, I feel like a lot of this modeling stuff is creating your own look, your own kind of feel, brand. I don't want to call it brand. I like to call it style, like your art direction, you know? And so deciding what that looks like for you is always a big part of the battle, you know? That's kind of what gives you your personality and what I think a lot of people like about your particular work. Yeah, just using vertexes there to kind of adjust some of the proportions. I felt like his arms were a little bigger than expected. So what you see here now is I'm building the face by using a square, the cube as the first polyprimitive that is gonna make the basic shape. And I'm gonna split it up using some edge loops. And obviously making the very kind of rough broad strokes shape of the head. I wanted to make sure that it was oversized, kind of comedic in shape for this goblin type character. Frankly, I wanted his head to almost be bigger than his torso, and I think doing that kind of gives people the sense of like it's like a baby, and kind of adds that cuteness factor while his body is kind of like weirdly like ripped, so he's kind of menacing at the same time. I find it might be discomforting for some people. Anyway, I got this Ninja Turtle head going right now, adding some more edge loops because I want to build out the nose a little bit. Build out the cheeks in essence right there. Making sure that's scaled properly to how I want. This part, I'm going to be honest with you, it's a lot of just problem solving and testing what works, what doesn't work. And figuring out what I like in terms of how I want this head to be. Because again, I don't necessarily have a blueprint. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along. Oh, this is another very useful feature. Turning on the wire mesh kind of overlay. I find it useful in other situations, but you saw a preview right there. But sometimes that helps when you're smooth previewing an otherwise complex geometric shape. Yeah, so that's what's happening right here. Gonna expand down the chin, bring in the cheeks a little bit to round out the head a bit more. And then adjust the eyes, the forehead, so it's a little more kind of natural, and that the nose juts out a bit more evenly. Actually, I think something that you missed was that I used the bridge tool to connect multiple vertex points at one position in order to create that nose. Kind of like how you see the model's face right now. All the vertex points kind of go to one position. That's using the bridge tool so that I can have one point to pull out to create the nose. Here I'm adding a little more detail in terms of arms. I felt like before he might have been a little too menacing with his huge broad shoulders. So I'm just gonna scale it back and bring his shoulders in so that it's kind of sloping off his neck a little more smoothly. And I'm back at the head now, trying to fix the cheekbones and the face and the nose and the chin so that it kind of fits my vision of how I wanted this character model to be. And there you go. What you see there is a preview of the geometric model, and then I was using the bridge tool to actually combine multiple vertex points so that there was less, creases in the smooth preview model. And there you go. After duplicating a second model, I was able to kind of fix up some of the head, the way it formed. And then I just pulled a simple rectangle shape and kind of shaped it into this almost, how do I describe it? Kind of like a pebble shape to create the elf-like ears for this goblin. And then just positioning and rotating the ears where I'd want them to be. Now I'm doing some just final tweaks on the body, making sure it didn't exactly have the proportions that I wanted. So I remember going back and forth on this model in terms of how I wanted the body to look, because I knew that it was eventually going to be shirtless and just with kind of loincloth. So I needed to make sure that the upper body at least was how I wanted it to look. And now I believe what I'm going into is creating the actual clothing of the character. Starting obviously with the loincloth, I like to start with a flat plane and then use the tool in Maya to bring down the faces, because typically start with a few faces. I want to bring it back to one and use my edge loops as a way of creating more. I position where I want the loincloth, make sure that my mirror function is on, and then extrude from the edges to create more faces that basically will wrap around the model and create like a kind of fur skirt in a way. And then making sure to kind of position as I go along, extrude, position, extrude, and position, as you can see here. Rotate, that's basically how I make the very broad stroke shape of the skirt. And then once I have it in position, I use the bridge tool to kind of connect it. And then now you have a basis. And so from here, what I'll do is position it a little bit higher, maybe scale it so that it fits more naturally around the character's waist, add a few more edge loops to add some detail to the model, because I know eventually what I'm going to do is make the edges jagged to reflect kind of that fur asymmetrical look. Obviously, since I said asymmetrical, I'm turning off the symmetry function on my mirror and then just pulling down certain areas of the skirt to make it look jagged and kind of rough effectively. There you go. You got a bit of a skirt going on here. Maybe do a few tweaks. I think the back is a little weird right now, so I think eventually I'm going to go back and tweak that. Oh, here I'm extruding it a little bit, adding it 0.05, I think 0.025 thickness to give it a bit more weight, so that's not just a flat plane. And then applying the smooth feature to really make it look kind of more organic. You can also keep the geometric look. I kind of like it, but sometimes it's nice to match everything together. Here I believe what I'm going to do is add a bit of a belt and then extrude in this area. This is, at this point for the skirt, I'm just adding details to make it a little more, give it a little more polish to it. Yeah. Now what I'm going to build is a little bit of jewelry. So basically what I did was I took a square polygon and then shaped it in the shape of a fang, position it around the neck, and effectively what I'm going to do is duplicate a bunch of times and then change the scale, maybe flip the mirror so that it looks more, looks like it's oriented in different ways or comes from different parts of a face, and then basically position this kind of bone fang necklace around this goblin's neck in the way that I want it to look. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to be adding the basically the rope that ties all the fangs together and positioning it around the body that I want, and then extruding from the top face, basically extrude from the top face and then wrap around the body in a way that I think looks natural. There you go. So extrude and then pull out, extrude and pull out. That's basically the same technique I use for making the skirt. And then I'm basically gonna rely on the what do you call it? The smooth shading feature in the future to kind of make it look more natural. But when it comes to modeling, at least for my technique and my style, it's really just building a kind of a rough shape out of geometric patterns or geometric shapes, and then tweaking and molding to what I like, and then using the smooth feature to kind of add some poly faces and make it a little cleaner. That might not necessarily work for low poly work, but you can always control how many additional polygons you add when you're smooth previewing. So you don't have to make it too smooth, because eventually at some point you get basically diminishing returns, if that makes any sense. Like you're adding faces, but it's not really adding any smoothness or detail to the model, because at some point you've already reached the max that you can create. But anyway, here we go. I'm continuing with making the rope necklace around his neck. It's usually helpful to do this as opposed to making kind of like a cylindrical shape. I guess technically another way I could have done it was make a cylindrical shape, cut out the center, position it on the neck, and then use edge loops to kind of tweak how it sits around the body. But at the time, this is what I did. You can approach it however you want. Again, it's a lot of problem solving on the fly as you kind of go through this, right? And there we go. Now I have a neck, and I'm probably just going to go and tweak some of the edge loops to make it a little cleaner. And then obviously bring back the fangs to where I want them to be. maybe add a few more so that it looks a little more substantial around this character's neck. I wanted to give it more of like a tribal feel, a little more kind of in tune with nature. I think I wanted this character to be a bit more comedy relief, a little more cute, basically. And I was kind of hoping to make it a bit of a mascot in the future, but we'll see how it lands. I think here I'm going to add a few more kind of jewelry pieces to this character. Like, for example, what I want to... Eventually, I believe I add earrings, a belt, and some other things like that. Maybe not a belt. Oh, here, I remember what I'm doing here now. I'm giving him a bit of a button nose because I wanted to make sure it was kind of like a dog nose, you know, like a snout, as opposed to like a proper kind of more humanoid nose. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just taking a basic rectangular shape, using Smooth Preview to make it a little simpler, smoother, and then kind of extruding and changing the edge loops in a way that I think looks more snoutish to give that character that cutesy feel again. Almost kind of like, since it's a holiday season, a Rudolph the Red-Nosed type of thing, except this is like a weird goblin troll type of character. Now what I'm doing is adding the earrings, and instead of having to make my own model, I think it's better to reuse assets where you can, to save yourself a little bit of time, especially if you're making this character as like an NPC. Usually when I make main characters and stuff, I'll create everything from scratch, or make everything original. But when it's an NPC that might be in the background or might be a monster that your main character slays, I think it's okay to reuse assets here and there, maybe some textures. So in this case, I'm reusing a belt I had made for that previous rogue. If you want to know how to make that belt, it's similar to how I made the skirt, right? You start with a flat plane and then extrude around to fit whatever shape you want it to fit, and then merge using the bridge tool in the future. So here we go. I'm kind of fixing the earring to fit around his left ear, while I have bones kind of jutting out from his other. He's quite punk rock. That's the mood I've kind of given him at this point. And yeah, now it's just some tweaking, making sure I don't have overlapping polys, nothing intersecting too much or too awkwardly. Because when you when you model, or when you rig the character and get them to move, intersecting polys might end up looking really bad in terms of how the character moves. Like, you might get like a knee going through torso or something, right? So you just got to be careful of that stuff. And a lot of it is also in the way you rig a character, but it's also in how many polys and how you model it too. So it's a dance. And there you have it. We got a goblin character. I think he's quite cute. Got a nice little skirt, some really funky punk rock jewelry. I'm just kind of tweaking his body now at this point, kind of giving some final adjustments to kind of make it how I wanted it to look. But at this point, I'm pretty sure I remember being quite happy with how he turned out. And yeah, hopefully y'all were able to follow along and it made sense to you. I will come out with more step-by-step, not necessarily step-by-step, but I'll make a model and talk through what I'm doing at the same time, so that you kind of see me doing it live and you can follow along. But again, my style is I kind of make it up as I go along. I might have some concept art that I work from, but a lot of it is just problem solving on the fly. So it's hard for me to give you like a blueprint of, hey, I made this character, do exactly this to recreate it, you know? And you know, you want to have some originality, right? You want to kind of come up with your own people. Anyway, I hope you like this little goblin guy. I think he's quite cute. I hope I can make him a mascot in the future. Look forward to more videos in the future. I think I'll be making a monster series, because lately I've been doing a lot of kind of protagonist-y type of characters, you know, the paladin, the dwarf, the fighter, the warlock, all these rogues and all these people. So I'm going to make a bit of a monster series. I'm hoping to make a troll, an orc, maybe like an owl bear or something, some crazy stuff like that. So stick around. Hopefully you find something you like. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. If you like the content I put out there, please consider subscribing. Yeah, so I'll talk to you soon, okay? Bye.